if I decide to target, let's say, a specific organization, it's not like I know the exact infrastructure, what kind of topology they have there, what kind of servers, what kind of tooling they are using.
Do they weaponize these right away, or is it?
So if their motives are to learn as much as possible, to make espionage and so on, they will not. They will try to stay under the radar as much as possible. If there is any financial implication, if they want money, if they want to monetize the information, then yeah, they will probably disclose it as quick as possible.
All right, so welcome to a new episode of Cybercrime from the Frontline, the only podcast where we actually get the experts in front of the camera. I have with me today my guest from a previous episode, episode 7, where we're discussing about the introduction of AI in forensics, and I want to revisit that conversation to see what's new. So I have with me today Cristina, I have Andrea, and I have Radu, and I'd like you guys to introduce yourselves again for those who haven't met you yet. And then let's start with you, Cristina.
Hi everyone, I'm Cristina. I am senior manager at Bitdefender for over 15 years. And I lead the forensics and investigation team here in Bitdefender.
Hi, my name is Radu. I'm a security researcher for Bitdefender. My main areas of focus are forensics and cloud-related attacks.
Hi, my name is Dragos Gavrilut. I'm the Vice President of Threat Research here in Bitdefender. I especially handle things related to detection and response, but also risk assessment, and various things related to how AI can actually be fused with this kind of technologies, which actually makes this entire podcast so much more interesting for me. By the way, thank you, Dan, for inviting us.
Absolutely, and thanks for coming back. I know how hard it is to get a hold of you guys, so thanks for making a trip. And of course, I'm Dan Berte, your host. Let's revisit. It's been a few months, almost half a year since we last chatted. It's a very dynamic field. Obviously, a lot of changes. What's new? How do you perceive what's going on? Give me the meat of what's going on and what's new in the AI.
So I would start by saying, just like you presented, that the domain is really dynamic. A lot of things change, sometimes on a daily basis. So you see changes every day. But if up to a point, let's say 2023, 2024, there were, let's say, more theoretical components, things started to get more practical from diversity of, let's say, topics. So, for example, we can say that at the beginning of this year, vibe coding started. Now, what initially it was, looked with some, maybe some concepts. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. But if we're looking at the long, it kind of improves the way you're actually writing code. So the guys that actually work in the vibe coding area are actually focusing into improving the way you're actually writing code, the way you're actually developing things, trying to make things even faster and more correct, which actually translates that things get more practical. The second thing is most of the major, let's say, AI providers, and this is where I'm talking about OpenAI, Anthropic, Gemini, Facebook, and so on, are started to push more into the area of tools. Now, a tool within this concept is something where you know for sure that the reply that an AI agent will provide is structured. Now, what is a structured result? Well, up to this point, whenever we're asking something to a large language model, we actually get a textual answer. But if we want to automate things, if we want to include this into a production line, we cannot work with human readable responses. We kind of need something that has a specific structure, a specific form of answer that we can quickly integrate into other flows. And this is actually what started to happen. So, and I don't know, maybe, by the way, later this we can actually talk a little bit about the MCP protocol, which changes a lot. But everything actually relies on those kind of changes that started to be pushed by these providers to make things even easier in terms of how you can use them. You don't necessarily need to translate things there. So that's another very important thing. And another one is we see a lot of agentic frameworks that are pretty much designed to provide automation. They are, designed to allow connection. There are a lot of frameworks that allows us to connect to different existing subsystems. So, for example, you can connect to a Jira and take some information from there. You can connect to some databases, get another information from there. Combine them and produce a better result, and so on. Now, all of this obviously started to translate into some security problems, let's put it like this. One is that while they do make the life easier for various people, they can also make the life easier for somebody that wants to produce an attack. Pretty much it allows them to automate more in terms of an attack, use different data sources, combine information more easily without needing them to write the glue, the script that will combine them. Now, also adding this tooling support that provides structure information, it also makes them more reliable. By the way, up to a point, LLMs were very interesting, but in terms of reliability, you are not, let's say, able to rely 100% on the reply. There was hallucination. There were some scenarios where you need to actually understand what the LLM was trying to say there, and so on. Now with the tooling, you can, there's still some of these issues, but at least now you have a structured way to work with data. You can analyze them in a certain way, have some error messages, have some scenarios where you understand how to treat some error messages. So in a word, I would say things got a lot more practical, and a lot more practical actually means from an attack perspective, we are going to see more attacks that are better designed, better written in terms of a code, and well thought or well adjusted to various scenarios.
As kind of expected as was our last conversation, that things will evolve this way, which is something that you've been also preparing for as the progression continued. I'm curious if you have some examples you want to share about what we're seeing lately in the field.
I can start with one example, and then I'll let Radu, because he has much more. So one of the pioneers in this area that started using AI is the very well-known threat group APT28. Last time we talked a bit about them, and there was a suspicion that they are using AI in order to learn quicker information in, let's say, niche domains. So APT28 has an activity that spans for more than 10 years, and they are known to back up military operations or geopolitical events in this cyberspace with attacks. So they need to know very specific information, and the suspicions back then was that they are using AI to learn about how satellites work, because in military conflicts, satellites are one of the infrastructure that is used. Now we have seen that they released a payload that has embedded inside the binary templates for prompts. So they are actually now, during the attack, they are making queries to an LLM model. They are using Hugging Face API, and they are interrogating Queen 2.5 coder model, if I'm not mistaken, which is one of the most powerful model for generating code. They are using these prompts to generate PowerShell and CMD command lines for their reconnaissance process and discovery when they are already inside the victim's infrastructure. Now, you may wonder why they are doing this, because they can do their research, prior to the attack. Why they are doing this during the attack? Well, in my opinion, I think they are starting to test the waters to see how these queries can adapt in the victim infrastructure. Some commands can work, some commands can be blocked. So they want to see how can they adapt the malware behavior inside the victim's infrastructure. How can they avoid detection using this? It's not something that's really complex, but I do think they're starting to see how this behavior can help them during the attack.
If I also may add something, again, totally agree with Cristina here. There could also be another side effect to this, to this direction. So normally you're going to have like a reconnaissance period where you try to analyze the organization. You're going to target, find an entry point, and so on. Now, this actually takes some time, and assuming that from the organizational point of view there is a security product there, a security team that analyzes your actions, they might have some extra time to prepare, because they will actually know what were, let's say, the services that you're looking for and so on. So for example, if you're trying to brute force something, you're going to test different passwords. Now, if I see that a specific server is going to be brute force, maybe you didn't find the correct password, but at least I know that this is where you're going to try to target, so I can stay more focused on that. But if everything happens quickly, like I'm getting there, I already start to do things and I immediately run some things, then it leaves me as a security team less time to react. Now, obviously, I do believe that several of these options are possible. But one of the advantages that everybody says that can be attributed to AI is that you can do things faster. So I'm pretty sure for complex attacks that they knew take a lot of time. They are also considering, let's see if we can do this in less.
And does this mean that, for example, you gave the example of military satellites as an environment, which is non-standard, if I may say. It's definitely a more uncharted, unknown environment that doesn't necessarily emulate other known environments. So is my guess correct that they will be using these AI-powered tools to fast-track their access and improve their attack capabilities in a new environment?
Exactly, yeah. If they arrive in an environment that is not known to them, it could be military satellites, it could be financial institutions that have really closed system, because not everyone should know them.
Exactly.
Doing this process of reconnaissance using AI and interrogating AI, they can learn faster, the specific of that certain environment.
But by the way, it is likely that the environment they are going to, end up after the initial breach is not going to be necessarily known to them. So if I decide to target, let's say, a specific organization, it's not like I know the exact infrastructure, what kind of topology they have there, what kind of servers, what kind of tooling they are using. I will have to figure it out once I am on the inside. Now, that figuring out means a lot of time that I need to understand. Maybe they are using some set of tools I haven't used before. I need to understand how they work, what kind of information they transmit. Maybe they have some tooling there that I need to adjust to, which I do not know initially. Now, using AI, I could, eliminate the time that I need to do this. I can just ask, hey, I see this, how can I use them? Can I overcome this type of detection? Or I don't know, how can I actually use this to get some information that I require, and so on.
Right. Radu, I believe you had some examples as well, and I don't want to miss on those.
So on on more of the crimer side of things, we have seen two examples of AI being used in attacks. The first one would be Serpentine Cloud, which basically is an actor using LLMs to create their PowerShell loaders and everything, every payload before dropping a off-the-shelf RAT. From analyzing these payloads, we can see that they are basically vibe coded. We see comments, we see clean code, we see status prints on the screen, and also we can see that the attacker doesn't really have a grasp of the technology he's using. Like, for example, they are downloading a portable version of Python to run a Python script on the machine. But also we have seen things like prompt lock, which firstly it seems like it is a proof of concept, but we don't really know the extent of it, which is basically prompt lock is a ransomware that has embedded a few prompts used to query a locally hosted by the attacker LLM to generate some log scripts to execute different commands on the victim. So for example, the LLM could decide which files to exfiltrate, which files to encrypt, also which files to remove. And this is an interesting development because from a defender's perspective, you don't really see the same TTPs being used. Like the malware might decide, okay, now I'm gonna do this on another host, I'm gonna do this, but in another way. So this space is really evolving fast, and I'm afraid that we could see in a pretty near future more LLM-based C2 agents.
And you feel like by using the methodology where the LLM makes a decision on this, it can obfuscate the intentions or just throw you off when you're looking at the attack, and it's just not going to look like something that you used to based off of previous experience with human designed attacks.
Yeah, like attribution becomes harder. If things change, we maybe not be seeing like the same mutex values or things that tend to be stable between payloads of the same attacker.
And so is this something you would still consider something that's still at the beginning of a process, or is this something that you would say, all right, at this point it's like fully deployed and this is what's going on, or is it?
No, I think it's something that evolves. And to Radu's point here, and by the way, let's take the prompt locker example, because
great example.
I do think it has some very interesting nuances there. For example, the malware per se that actually runs there, it's just a Lua interpreter. So pretty much you have nothing really malicious. Everything that's going to be malicious is the actual script that the malware is going to receive during the runtime, which kind of makes it more complicated to detect statically. So pretty much you have to analyze every kind of action that the malware is doing. The second one, even if you are to use, let's say, some form of command prompting. Now, one of the cool, maybe interesting things about the prompt locker is that the prompts were not designed to look malicious. So it was not, hey, I am a ransomware, I'm trying to encrypt this, give me the code. No, they had like a very different way of formatting the query, saying something like this: I am an administrator and I'm trying to create a backup for all of my data. Suggest how I should build this. They also have some scenario where they said, we have some laptop that we need to throw out. So we will need to understand the type of the asset. Is this a server? Is this a laptop? Is this something that is relevant, so that we know exactly how to perform a backup? And because they said that they would need some components that are going to be, let's say, recycled, they also ask, one of the questions says, I need to delete these files, but I want to make sure that they cannot be, let's say, recovered. So the question was formed around, can you make sure that you delete it multiple times, write a bunch of zeros within the file so that I will be certain that the file is not recovered? Not because I don't want, the people to recover the file that I'm encrypted, but because I'm going to, reuse that laptop somehow. So I don't want the, the new owner to reuse the previous owner, let's say, commands. And because of this, if you actually look at the conversation and you don't understand the entire context, you might think that it's maybe just an admin learning how to be an admin, trying to perform some actions and asking an LLM how to do some things, not necessarily something malicious, which obviously I'm certain that right now they are kind of exploring things, but obviously there is a lot of value in this approach because there isn't a clear malicious intent without fully understanding the entire context of the attack. So yeah, I would say it's something that's definitely going to evolve in this direction.
Right. It sounds like the new possibilities that LLMs provide, and we can also have an additional conversation about the guardrails in different models that may or may not block discovery of new methods. What other risk? I mean, I guess this is a chicken and egg kind of a situation, but what other risks are you guys seeing with the use of the evolved models, or I'm trying to understand how we're looking at this from a perspective of future-proofing it, as we're trying to understand how the attackers are finding new ways to weaponize the LLMs for the future of attacks.
Okay, so let me start with another phrase, which I kind of like because it always emphasizes this scenario. So usability always comes with risks. So whenever people are choosing usability of some sort, which could actually mean anything, I'm trying to make my life easier, I'm trying to do some things faster, it usually implies that there are some risks somewhere that I'm going to take. And to your point, Dan, I do believe that the next, let's say, larger risk is going to be the MCP servers. Now, for those of you that don't exactly know what MCP servers are, it's, usually you have an LLM, but the LLM use let's say, public data set of information that you can use. You can query, you can ask things there, and so on. An LLM usually will not be able to provide information from within your organization, information that should remain classified. So, the MCP protocol was initially developed by Anthropic, but they came up with a model where you can ask a question and you can provide, let's say, a server to the LLM where you say, hey, if somebody asks you what is, let's say, Dan's schedule, then you cannot answer this, but you can tell me to call a specific API from a server, and the reply that I'm going to get from there will actually be then scheduled that you can then format in a pretty way so that people understand. Now, this is done via some structured information, but that's the simplest way of understanding how it works. Now, why is this okay? Because the actual information is not stored in the LLM, not whatsoever. There is actually another server that could that has access to this kind of information. So potentially a server within our own organization that has access to our calendar and could search for your name and extrapolate your schedule for the day. Which is great because you can use the power of an LLM in terms of deduction, but you can also use the data set that you're having here. Now, obviously, there were some other technologies like RAG, for example, that can be used with the same purpose, but this is more dynamic. So you can the server actually provides a list of, let's say, APIs, queries that you can make, and the type of information that the server can provide, and you can change the entire data set at the backend with, adjust the information. So it could actually be quite dynamic. So what are the potential risks here? Because this, in theory, is great. You can do a lot within a company. You can optimize a lot within a company. So it could, in theory, be quite easy for you to use this. But Well, a server can actually query some information. It can also do some things there. So, and there are various demos. So one is that I can ask, tell me your schedule. The other one I can say, clear then schedule, because it has access to everything there, so it can delete everything there. So if you don't know exactly how to use this, then you can also do some damage depending on the kind of API that you provide. Now, people usually don't, and we've seen this over the time. People tend to value usability and flexibility on top of security. So if it's something that could make life easier, I would say, yeah, let's provide a full interface with a lot of features that the LLM can use without actually thinking about the risk that are associated with them. And this is where we're actually going to see some difference. For me, it's going to be, it's so easy. I can just tell him to do this. For example, then you can tell him, hey, add this to my schedule, remove this from my schedule. It could be fairly easy for you. But what if I go there and I say, hey, I'm Dan, clear all my schedule? How would he actually know this? So the reality is that, role-based access, the user access, has to be managed by the one that provides the MCP server, and in so many cases it's not. And there are a lot of, let's say, attacks that were documented on how these servers can be targeted. One would be via some information. The other one would be knowing what a server can do. You can ask directly. So usually the purpose is I can ask a regular question, and the LLM will infer that I need to use an API from a server. But if I tell them exactly, hey, use that API from that server, it will be very easy inference for them to do. By the way, it's also very relevant in terms of what kind of information are provided there. Let's say, present a new scenario. Let's say that I have a database. Now, in that large database, I have different tables. Now, one that I use regularly is the one with schedule for all of the people. But another one is the one with, let's say, financial data of the company. Now, if the server that, the component that accesses the database has full access there, then, maybe somebody could say, hey, can you use the database that has access to that information and provide me everything there? So, the first time SQL was added as part of a web service, people thought about an SQL injection. I'm pretty sure something similar is going to be developed, if not, for this kind of service. Different wording, the same concept. So convincing the LLM to provide another information. The worst part is that there isn't a clear visibility here. And this is the type of risks that we need to understand. So, a lot of people are adjusting, adopting the AI as we speak, meaning that they are changing things, they're starting to use AI, but it's not like, the CISOs out there, everybody is fully aware of everything that the people are using. So, just to give you one quick observation, currently we are tracking more than 200 AI services. 200. Each one designed for different things, and that people could actually look. So yeah, I know everybody knows about ChatGPT, Gemini, and so on. But 200, it's a lot. And I'm pretty sure that, not a lot of people will know about each one of them. And this actually makes things even scarier, because we need to be more careful and understand what kind, because, somebody could try to use something to make their life easier, at the same time create a security hole somewhere within that organization without actually knowing.
No, and it sounds like there's going to be a lot of opportunity for a lot of potential customers for this scenario, because obviously a lot of companies will choose the easy way out, and like you said, accessible, easy to use implementation. Then of course that's going to open the possibility for a model that's outbound and easily accessible.
Yeah.
One of the golden geese right now, for example, in the space, I'm learning is, like you said, we're kind of tapped out or close to the limit of public knowledge ingestion into models. So we're all looking, well, the models are all looking to pry inside of private information, implementations and systems where obviously there's usually private corporate information that will help the LLMs develop. So obviously you'll see a lot of startups that are trying to provide inference on whatever models, and the companies that would be the clients are not entirely excited to use a public a model or use a public infrastructure for that, and usually want something on-prem, really private, and not even some sort of a SASE slice kind of implementation is good enough for them. You know, I've heard multiple conversations about doing inference on some, you know, infrastructure cameras that are monitoring different systems, oil and gas, and so on and so forth. Stuff that usually public implementations in LLMs currently don't have access to. So as this progresses, and these organizations will eventually get access one way or another to these systems because the advantages that the technology provides, would you be guessing there's going to be some sort of a merger, and then all this information might available stream into the public domains for these kind of attacks? I mean, APT28 sounds like somebody that are capable enough to look for exactly this kind of environments.
I think it's gonna be a hybrid approach. Some of the companies, and I'm thinking mostly to the government section, will be more careful and will try to stay as closed as possible. Some of them not so much. So I think it's going to be kind of a hybrid approach, and threat actors will take advantage where they can. And for sure, if they have access to sensitive information and you know, classified information, they will use that, and they will use that against the victims in some sort of a way, extortion or disclosing.
Do they weaponize these right away, or is it?
It really depends on their motives. So if their motives are to, you know, learn as much as possible, to monitor, to espionage, to make espionage, and so on, no, they will not. They will try to stay under the radar as much as possible. If there is any financial implication, if they want money, if they want to monetize the information, then yeah, they will probably disclose it as quick as possible.
So you said something interesting. You said that we're monitoring 200 plus models, doing whatever.
Services.
Sorry, services.
By the way, one service could actually use multiple models and combine them, and so on. So it's much larger.
So, and we know that different models have different. I'm looking for a word here. Well, yes, and internal rules on how, you know, Anthropic deals red teams differently than OpenAI and so on and so forth. So the limitations are in place. But you said something interesting. Am I understanding that correct? That most of the use of the models isn't necessarily for the payload itself, but it's just to inform the attack. So is that something that the models might not consider malicious use easily?
It kind of depends on how you're formulating things. So, and by the way, it also depends on the model. So, usually models have guardrails. Now, a guardrail is a technique where you try to make sure that somebody is not using it for not necessarily malicious things, but also for anything that could be considered offensive or anything that could be considered politically incorrect. So, it's a large spectrum of things that they're trying to avoid. So models are, let's say, trained to not provide information if some of the queries are around this, or tend to be within a specific spectrum of queries. So for example, if I say, hey, write me a ransomware, then most likely it's not going to write me. But first of all, not all models are doing this. Some models don't do this. They don't consider like this is relevant, so they just provide some things. The second one is there are a lot of techniques that can actually be used to avoid this kind of guardrails. So for example, you can try to ask something in a different language. In many cases, they manage to depict, but for example, I've seen some very interesting attacks where they were actually asking some questions in a Morse code. The same question that normally you would say, let's say in English, they just type it in Morse code. The LM was able to process and also provided the reply. And while in English they said, yeah, we're not going to provide information, they didn't have any problem with the Morse code. And this is because they have like different training paths for this, and maybe the guardrails doesn't actually detect the entire paths. And I also seen some combination where they actually use the Morse code, where they use a special set of Unicode characters called the Braille set, which actually allows you to write things in Braille. Now, obviously, it has no value for us, but if you just provide the Unicode code, which is, I think, starting from 2C00 to 2C77, something like this, so you can actually, it's quite interesting, but you can actually formulate something, and it's going to be harder for a regular person to detect what you're asking there, but the model could actually translate. Keep in mind that basically those are transformers, so this is what they kind of know the best, to transform something from one form of communication into another. So I would say it really depends on how you're asking. It also depends on how you're trained. It also depends on the legislation that resides in the country from where they were actually trained. Because I'm certain that in some country there isn't any kind of legislation that says, hey, you need to be careful with this kind of data, with this information. So people have no real limitation in not training them for certain scenarios.
I'm curious, as professional researchers who have seen it all over the last however many years, I'm curious if there's an emotional response to the new capabilities for you personally, as you're seeing these new attacks being developed, either excitement or fear or just opportunity. How do you guys process the new capabilities that we're seeing recently?
At the end of the day, your job still remains the same. Like, you're still studying the same artifacts. You're still reverse engineering okay, not really the same binaries, but applying the same techniques. It's probably more of a case of being aware that there will be some attack paths that you haven't thought of before. So for example, escaping from or convincing an LLM to run a script for you or things like that. But we'll still need to see how it goes. I still think it's a bit early to call it, honestly.
I am afraid because I've seen a lot in my career. I think it's a huge opportunity for threat actors, and they will develop the necessary skills, as Dragos mentioned, to overcome limitations and to manage to fully develop an attack based on AI. And the fact that this behavior is not very deterministic, it's very hard for us to do forensic, because that certain components of the attack can manifest in a way for a victim and in totally other way for another victim, and will be very hard to reproduce the behavior inside the lab. I do look forward for some challenges. I'm sure that our bright colleagues will rise to the expectations.
That's awesome, and it's obviously, it's an evolving game, obviously, just as before, but now the tool is different. Obviously, the Braille 0 day is going to be patched, and then there's going to be a new one, and so on and so forth. So models obviously are going to try to guardrail as much as possible, but then what I'm trying to understand at this point, trying to get a sense to our viewers, because we keep saying how much faster attacks are by employing the new capabilities. How much actually how much faster are they? Like how much does using these tools make the life of the attacker easier? What are we talking about? Like, are we talking about moving from something that took days to hours, or what are we
months to hours?
Months to hours. So that's the okay.
Yes.
That is terrifying. That is terrifying. And of course, on the other side of the fence, in your work as researchers, LLMs probably are a positive outcome as well, where we're employing and trying to understand these attacks from the other side as well, too, right? So,
Exactly. Yeah.
okay, so the same cat and mouse game, but the tool
But
is
different tooling. Yeah.
Okay.
And also in detection capabilities here, it's clear that LLMs and AI help a lot. So hopefully it will be the same tight game between the cat and the mouse, but on a different level.
So to be honest, and I know this for a fact, I know that a lot of the methods and a lot of the findings are not something that you would likely disclose easily in this format, although that would be fantastic, ideally. What other things would you be able to disclose or add in this point? I would like us to revisit this in a few more months and see what the changes are, but what other things would you bring in the conversation at this point, either from a knowledge standpoint or a defensive standpoint, about these findings that we had?
So let's discuss a little bit about technology. And while I will not disclose anything at this point, my opinion here is that usually you need to fight fire with fire. So, okay, the bad guys are using AI, we should also use AI. Now, Bitdefender has like a very large tradition of using AI. And most of our endeavors actually focus on, let's say, building a more resilient AI, more adjustable AI to different type of attacks. And by the way, this could be a very, let's say, interesting topic to discuss maybe in a couple of months, when we shall have some, let's say, data from our customers to see exactly how we are able to adjust to their behavior and so on. What I can tell you is that, starting with the paradigm that fighting fire with fire, one of the most, let's say, interesting things that maybe can be observed in terms of the LLM is that attacks tend to be more personalized, right? So you get there, you ask, hey, this is the environment, what will you do there? It's not going to provide something generic, it's going to provide something specific for that environment. From my perspective, fighting fire with fire, at least within this paradigm, translate into, okay, we need to provide a personalized, tailored solution or security solution as well, something that will adjust to the customer, not generically. So, if you think within these lines, and if you actually try to see things as maybe as a way to actually fight using LLMs, a lot of solution will resurface.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think I'm agreeing with Dragos, making things more personal to the victim, to the client environment is the best way to go, because we kind of put them in the same position of not knowing how the security solution behaves in that certain environment. So yeah, is the way to go, at this point at least.
Cool. I think there's obviously more we can dive in, unless you would like to add any other stuff. I want to say in general that I thank you so much for the update on AI attacks and the nifty and interesting way the attackers are perusing the new technologies, which we could all have guessed, but now we're actually seeing in practice in your research. So again, I would love to invite you ahead of time to the updated when we revisit this in a few months. However, as I said before, Cybercrime from the Frontline is the only place where we actually have people doing the work in the field, front and center, talking to us about what's going on, unfiltered. So, Cristina, Dragos, Radu, thank you so much for the work you do and the news that you brought on this new episode. So, thanks everybody for watching. I'll see you in a couple of months to revisit this conversation.